class, good morning. Today we're going to start a new unit. We're going to be talking about triads. The past few classes we've been talking about intervals, and triads are just expansion upon your interval knowledge. There's nothing to be scared of. You already know these concepts. We're just going to piece them together to make some chords. So the first thing I want to do is talk about the four qualities of triads that we're going to be studying. The first two are more common, major and minor. The second two are less common, diminished and augmented. I want to play these for you because as we've talked about, it's really important to be hearing all the things that you're learning and not just seeing them on paper. So the first chord I'm going to play, the first triad, is a major triad. What kind of a sound does a major triad have?
It's a happy sound.
It is a happy sound. It's probably the type of sound you're most familiar with hearing in pop music and when people, noodle on the piano. The second type is a minor triad. What kind of a sound does the minor triad have?
It's a sad sound.
It is a sadder sound. That's how a lot of people describe it. It's a really common thing. It's just important to know what the difference is, and we'll talk about how they're constructed in just a second. The other two are a little bit more difficult to hear and not as stereotypical in their sounding. So how about this one? That's a diminished triad. How does that one sound?
Sounds tense.
It does sound tense. It's not found as much as the minor, but it's like, it just has that unsettled feeling. And the last one is the augmented triad. And you might say the augmented triad feels like it needs to resolve somewhere. So it's tense, but in a different way. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. The next thing we're going to do is start constructing these chords. Let's start with major. And the worksheet that you got at the beginning of the class has essentially this exact same thing on it, but less colorful. So you don't need to copy this down, just reference your worksheet, and please don't lose that. Let's talk about the major triad. It's built with a perfect fifth and a major third. As you can see, the E to the B, I'll play it for you, is that perfect fifth. That's a sound that we hear a lot. It's a sound that we studied a lot in the past. And then the middle note is a G sharp, which is a major third up from E. So you can think about an E major triad being built E to G sharp, a major third, and E to B, a perfect fifth. E to G sharp, and E to B, and the whole triad. And that's an E major triad. If you were to write this in shorthand, if you will, you would write a big E and a big M. You can also think about this as two different types of thirds. And if you want to talk about that, see me after class if it's easier for you to think in thirds all the time. But I would suggest thinking about it as the major third and the perfect fifth. Let's move on to minor. Minor describes the root to the third interval. So in this case, we have an E to a G, a minor third. And then the same in this one, we have a perfect fifth, an E to a B. Yes?
Why isn't the fifth minor?
Why isn't the fifth minor? I bet a lot of people know the answer to that, but it's important to remember we will never have a minor fifth. A fifth is a perfect interval, so it will either be perfect, diminished, or augmented, and we'll actually see all of these three within these four chords. So it's a minor chord, but it's not a minor fifth, because you'll never have a minor fifth. So we have a perfect fifth from E to B, which if you notice is the same perfect fifth we had over here. So we have an E to a G, which is a minor third, and an E to a B, which is a perfect fifth. And we put the whole triad together. That sad sound we were talking about earlier. And if you were to write this in shorthand, you would use a little m. Probably a little e and a little m. And I'm going to tell everybody that I would prefer you to write the little m with a line over it, because if you have handwriting that I don't distinguish well, I just want you to get all the points you possibly can. So I always want you to write a line over the M. You might also see it like this, E minor, But that's where the line is so important, because you just need to be really specific in distinguishing the minor quality. All right, let's move on to the less common ones. The first one we have here is the E augmented. And I'll play that for you. It has that sort of incomplete sound. And the reason that is from the fifth. Instead of having a perfect fifth, we have an augmented fifth from E to B sharp. An E to a B, as we've talked about, is a perfect fifth, so E to B sharp would be augmented. And then we add the G sharp in the middle, which is a major third up from E, very similar to the major chord. We have E, G sharp, B sharp. Has that sort of incomplete feeling we were talking about. With this one, in the shorthand, you'll see it either E with A-U-G, but that's not that common, so what we're going to be looking at is E with a plus. And you can think about that plus as raising the fifth. And you can see that these two are really similar, just the fifth is different. Let's move to diminished, which is very similar to the minor, but the fifth is different. So the diminished describes the fifth. The E diminished chord is built with a diminished fifth, E to B flat. That is not an interval we all love that much at this point. I promise you will learn to appreciate it in the future. So we have a minor third on the bottom, E to G, the same type of third we have in the minor chord, and then we have a diminished fifth. So we have the minor third, E to G, and the diminished fifth, E to B flat. And put it together, that tense, like, ooh, that railroad tracks type of sound. All right, and then if you're writing this one, you will either have E-D-I-M, or little e with a circle, or a big E with a circle. And that's for a diminished triad. All right, so does everybody have a good grasp on this so far? Yes?
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
I know there's such thing as major and minor keys, but is there such thing as an augmented or diminished key as well?
There are not augmented or diminished keys, because you'll never have this type of chord as like your home base chord. For example, if you were hearing a progression in a major key, you have that like do feeling really, really intensely. But with the augmented and diminished chords, you just don't have that kind of stability underneath the chords to build an entire key off them. And also, we just don't have, it's just not how music is built. We can talk about that more after class if you like. All right, so I'm going to erase these so we can do some writing and identification of these chords. The first one I want to write is an A major chord. So I'm going to give you guys just a minute to think about how an A major chord would be written. A major. We're going to be in treble clef. A major. And if I were to suggest something, it's to know where each note is, obviously, know how to read music, but to put your A on there, and when you're doing root position triads, you're just going to stack the thirds up from there. So you know you have some kind of C and some kind of E. So can anyone spell the A major triad for me?
A, C sharp, E.
Right, we have a C sharp. Because we have the A to C sharp, the major third, and the A to E, the perfect fifth. Put it together. Lovely, lovely major triad. Let's think about minor. Let's do G flat minor. So we have our G flat, and we have some kind of B and some kind of D. Can anyone spell a G flat minor chord for me?
G flat, B double flat, and D.
Right. Oh, a D. Now let's look at G flat to D. I'm going to play it for you, and I want you to tell me if that sounds like the type of fifth we need in a minor triad, which is what type of fifth?
Perfect fifth.
Perfect fifth, right. So we have a G flat to a D natural. Does that sound like a perfect fifth?
No.
So how could we change that to make it a perfect fit?
D flat.
D flat. Exactly. Wonderful. Beautiful minor triad. We have the G flat to the B double flat to the D flat. Awesome. Now for kicks and giggles, let's go into bass clef down here. Let's do a diminished triad. Let's do B flat diminished. You might see it, B flat with a circle. So we'll start with our B flat. We know you have some kind of D and some kind of F. So can somebody spell the B flat diminished chord for me?
So B flat, D flat, and an E.
That is a really important thing to go over because you want to build it with thirds, and that's what I was talking about when you start writing the chord is to build it in thirds. Because if you were to write the E, and you were right, it is a D flat. If you were to write an E here, and harmonically, it's the same note as an F flat, which is what you would need in this triad. But if you write an E, this doesn't look like one of those nice root position triads that we've been talking about, does it? And at the same time, if I play a B flat, a D flat, and an E, technically the notes are the same, but when you notate it, when you're identifying it, you want to put that F flat, or you could get confused about the thirds and the fifths. Just trust me on this one. You want to keep it in thirds for now. All right, let's look at an augmented one. Let's do C augmented. So we'll start with our C, some kind of E, and some kind of G. How can we make this an augmented triad?
By making the G sharp.
Right, G sharp. So before with C, E, and G, we had a major chord, right? But to change a major chord to an augmented chord, you do what?
Raise the fifth.
Raise the fifth. Excellent. And then you have your really intense augmented triad. Excellent. Now I want you to take a look at your worksheet. And let's look at the ones that are on there. The first one on the worksheet, I'm not even going to have you look at the notes. I just want you to hear it. So what we have is a C sharp, an E sharp, and a G sharp. What kind of a sound does that have?
Happy sound major.
Right, happy sound, so it would be a major triad. The second one on the sheet we have is a D flat, an F natural, and an A flat. What kind of a triad is that? First of all, a D flat to an F is a what kind of third?
So major third?
Yes. And then a D flat to an A flat is what kind of fifth?
Perfect fifth.
Right. So we have the D flat, F, A flat, and we have another what kind of triad? Major triad. Awesome. The next one we have is A, C, and E flat. The third one on the top part of your triad worksheet. What kind of a triad is that? A, C, and E flat.
So diminished triad.
Right. Because we have the minor third and the diminished fifth. That tense sound. And then the last one we have is G, B, and D. What kind of a triad is that?
A G major triad.
G major, and this is what that sounds like. Awesome. All right, let's go on to the next part, and we're just going to do the first two of the notating, and I'm going to let you do the other two on your own at the end of class and ask me questions if you have them. So the first one on here is a D minor. And then the second one is, what's the second one on there?
B flat.
B flat minor. Actually, for good measure, let's do the third one, C diminished. So we're in bass clef. We need to start with our D. We have D, F, and A, right? That's our thirds order from D. How can we change this to make it a minor triad?
Leave it as is.
Exactly. I can tell by your face that you figured out that I was asking a trick question. We do leave it as it is because we have D natural, F natural, and A natural. Some people say that D minor is the saddest key that you can play in. All right, and then C diminished. Well, we have our C, our E, and our G. How can we change this to diminished?
By making E flat and flatten G as well.
Right. E flat and G flat. C, E flat, G flat. A little scary, right? All right, excellent. Let's look at some more challenging ones before we move on. And we're also going to talk about inversions, but we will get to that momentarily. Let's look at some double sharps and double flats, because that's something that we've talked about but haven't spent a lot of time working on. So let's look at G double sharp major. So we have a G double sharp, and always remember the X means double sharp. You don't put two sharps next to each other. How can we change this, G double sharp, to be a major triad?
By double sharping the B and the D as well.
Exactly. Great job. So you have G double sharp. Does that make sense? Excellent. And then the other one, let's look at B double flat minor. And remember, with the double flat, you do put two flats right next to each other. B, D and F, and double flat here. How can we make this a minor chord?
By double flatting the D and single flatting the F.
Right. We have B double flat, D double flat, and F flat. Good. I know those are a little more challenging, but I think that you will get the patterns the more that we talk about them. All right, so now that everyone's finished with the remaining exercises on the worksheet, we're going to move to the bottom half of the worksheet, which are inversions. So when triads are found with something other than the root in the bottom, in this case, if E is not in the bottom, it means that they're inverted. There are two inversions with triads we're going to talk about, first inversion and second inversion. As you know, a root position triad sounds like this. And if we were in E major, we would have do, mi, and sol, right? So let's sing that together. Do, mi, sol, mi, do. Good. Well, let's say we put the G sharp in the bottom. We would have mi, sol, and then do would be on top. Not do, just regular do. And then if we put the B in the bottom, we would have sol, do, and mi, right? So let's sing these and hear how they sound different and they feel different in our voices when we sing them. So let's sing root position, everyone. Do, mi, sol, mi, do. It sounds conclusive. It sounds like, you know, a chord. Let's try this first inversion triad. Mi, sol, do, sol, mi. Because you went on mi, it's not quite as conclusive. You still want to go to do, mi, do. And then the second inversion is even less. And I'm going to jump the octave because it is 10 a.m. Sol, do, mi, do, sol. And then you want to go to do, right? Good. So we have different feels with each of these triads, even though the three notes in each are the same, but they're just inverted. And let's talk about the symbols that go with each inversion. A root position triad, as we talked about, an E major triad, you would have E, big M. With first inversion, you're going to have a big E, a big M with a 6. And a second inversion, you're going to have a big E, a big M, and a 6, 4. These are really, really important to remember. Yes?
In the inversion symbols, why are they numbers? Like, what do those numbers actually mean?
Excellent question. So if you're looking at this one, for instance, the bottom note to the top note is a sixth, right? A G to an E would be a sixth. So that's why we use a sixth. And then in this one, we have a sixth from the B to the G and a fourth from the B to the E. So you just stack them like this. And actually, when you're writing inversion symbols, and I know we've talked about figured base a little bit, but when we talk about it more in the future, we know that it's assumed that there's a 3 here. When there's nothing but a 6, it's assumed that there's a 3, which is the G to the B. But when you see it, when you identify it, when you write it, you're just going to write 6. And because you're smart little students, everyone will know what you're talking about. Excellent. So, first inversion, second inversion, root position. Root position. First inversion. And second inversion. Does everyone understand how those are different? Why those are different?
Yes.
Excellent. Let's look at your worksheet. Let me erase this. So in these, in the first inversion, the third is on the bottom. If you're classifying this as root, third, fifth, you have the root on the bottom, the third on the bottom, the fifth on the bottom. And you'll start to recognize how these are notated at this phase, because when we're looking at them like this and not in like a piano or choral setting, it's really easy to identify the pattern. So look at the first one, for instance. We have an A, a C, an A, a C, and an F. If you look at the top of this section of your paper, what shape does this most closely resemble? Which inversion?
First inversion.
First inversion, right. Because we have the third here and the sixth here. So we know it's going to be some kind of 6. And if we stack this in thirds order, what notes do we have?
F, A, C.
F, A, and C, which is what quality of triad?
F major.
F major. Excellent. So we have big F, big M with a 6. F major in first inversion. Mi, sol, do. If we were in F major. Good. The next one that we have on the sheet, we have a D, a G flat, and a B flat. So which inversion does this most closely resemble?
Second inversion.
Second inversion, right, because we have the fourth and the sixth. So we have something 6, 4. And if we were to stack this in thirds order, we would have G flat, B flat, and D, which I'll play for you so you can identify it orally. G flat, B flat, and D. What quality triad is that?
Augmented.
Augmented. Excellent. So we would have G flat plus 6, 4. This is not a math problem. Don't get confused. The plus means augmented. We went over that earlier. What is the other one on there? We have a C sharp, an E, and an A. And which does this most closely resemble?
First inversion.
First inversion. It's very similar to this with the third and the sixth. And if we have A, C sharp, and E, what quality triad is that?
So a major triad.
A major. Excellent. And the last one, we have a C sharp, an F sharp, and an A, correct?
Yes.
All right. Which shape does this resemble?
Second inversion.
Second inversion. Awesome. 6, 4. And we have F in thirds order. What is this?
F sharp, A, C sharp.
Good. And what quality is that?
It's minor.
Right. So we have F minor. And don't forget your line. 6, 4. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Any questions? All right, good. Let's look at some that are a bit more complicated, that we don't get to recognize those patterns in. Before we move on to writing them, just want to spend a couple minutes. Let's use an easy triad. All right, so what notes do we have in this triad?
E, B, C, C.
That is not what I wanted. All right, so we have an E,
G,
G, and two C's.
Yeah.
So if we were to stack this in thirds order, how would we stack it?
C, G, E, or C, C, G, E.
In thirds order, C, E, G. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Sorry, I thought you said C, G, E. So we have what kind of triad here?
Major triad.
A C major triad. And which inversion? E is the what of the triad?
Third.
The third, which means it's what inversion?
First.
And the symbol for that is?
6.
6. Correct. So we have a C major 6. Let's look at another one. All right. What notes do we have here?
D, A flat, F, and another key.
Right. So what kind of chord do we have?
It's a diminished chord?
A D diminished chord. And is it in an inversion?
No, it's root position.
Right, it's root position. But let's say we had this instead.
Now it's in first inversion.
Which the symbol for is?
6.
Good. Good, good. Let's look at a couple more of these. All right, so what notes do we have in this one?
E flat,
E flat,
A flat,
A flat,
C,
and C. In thirds order,
A flat, C, E flat.
excellent. And what quality chord is A flat, C, E flat?
It's a major chord.
Correct. So it's A flat, major, and what's in the bass?
The fifth.
The fifth, which would make it?
Second inversion.
Which is the symbol for?
6/4.
6/4. Awesome. Cool. Does this make sense? Because looking at the patterns when you look at the triads like on the worksheet is easy. And this style isn't going to be on your test, but it's really important for you to know how to do these in the future. Does that make sense? How to look at these, put it in thirds order, know what's in the bass. You're all so smart. I just know you'll get it. Bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, ready every morning, most of the time. All right, let's go back to your worksheet and just notate the few that are on here. We're in treble clef. What's the first one?
E minor 6.
E minor 6. So what are the notes in an E minor chord?
E, G, B.
E, G, and B. And which one needs to go in the bass for it to be a 6?
G.
G. And when I was your age, I used to do this. I didn't want to make any mistakes, so I wrote whatever I needed to write to be most realistically, you could write it with the G here, the E here, and the B all the way up here, but that just isn't as nice to play in one hand on the piano. So let's just try and keep it simple here. When you get into composition and things like that later, you'll have a little bit more freedom, but I think it's in your best interest to keep things simple while you still know them. Let's do one more from the sheet. Let's do G augmented 6/4. So what notes do you need in a G augmented triad?
A G, B, and a D sharp.
And a D sharp. And if it's 6/4, which needs to be in the bottom?
D sharp.
D sharp. So we've got a D sharp, a G, and a B. sound that we know and love. All right, does anyone else have any questions about triads, about inversions, about anything? All right. You're gonna have a quiz next class, and I'll give you some homework out of the workbook for practice, and be sure to come and see me if you get caught up on anything. Don't ever hesitate to ask questions. All right, you can leave now.